Hi, everybody. My name is Angela Stopper. I'm really excited to be with you here today to talk to you a little bit about a practical learning framework for the modern workforce. Just as a little bit of background, I work at the University of California, Berkeley, and am the Chief Learning Officer there. So my team creates the learning and development opportunities for all 9,000 staff here on campus. So I'm really excited for you to be with me today. I'm excited to kind of share with you some of the learnings from this study that we did and a little bit of a new way of thinking about 70-20-10. So now we're just going to get all of the PowerPoint and everything set up and we'll start going. So just a little bit to talk about the objective of the webinar today. What I want to do is really unveil how learning leaders across the globe are using and measuring the success of formal, informal, and social learning programs. Kind of talk a little bit about how formal, informal, and social learning are used here at UC Berkeley, and discuss with you ways that I've been thinking about updating 70-20-10 in order to really engage learners within your organizations. So briefly, we'll talk about the 70-20-10 theory and what it looks like in practice. We'll talk about rethinking 70-20-10 a little bit and then revisioning the learning and development shop. And also, if we have time, we'll talk a little bit about measuring success. So real briefly in theory, because I'm sure most of you are very aware of 70-20-10, you know, there's a learning theory that talks about the fact that in the workforce, about 70% of what folks learn in order to do their jobs is learned through informal learning or learned through work experience. 20% is learned through social learning or kind of developed through others. And then 10% is learned through what we're calling formal learning. So those kind of structured formal classroom learning sessions. And, you know, thinking about that with the research team that I was working on, we wanted to see what really folks were actually doing in practice. So we did some interviews of 31 chief learning officers from around the world to kind of get their insights on what they were doing in the realms of informal, social, and formal learning. And on your screen, you'll see a list of the folks that we talked to and where they were located. And what we learned, you know, wasn't terribly shocking around formal learning. We learned that most people, when asked what they were doing in the formal learning space, talked about learning and development programs. But as we continued to talk to them, they started saying other words like feedback and coaching and mentoring and these things that we've kind of in the academic and in the practice space might think are more in the informal or the social space. And so when we talked to them about informal learning, you know, again, a lot of the learning that we got from folks was not terribly shocking. They talked about on-the-job learning experiences. They talked about experiential learning. They talked about online learning kind of falling into this bucket. But then they also, again, just like with formal learning, started saying things around communities of practice and social tools and simulations that, you know, really, according to the theory, would fall more in the social or formal learning space. So then, to round out our study, we were talking to folks about what they were doing around social learning. And, you know, they talked a lot about communities of practice, team and group-based learning, project-based learning, networking, those kind of things that you would expect to see someone talking about when sharing what they're doing in social learning. But then folks started talking about social media as well and talking about Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and Twitter and how they were trying to think about those tools in the social learning space as well. And, you know, there's a model that puts forward kind of social learning and social media, and because the two are quite different, but it really talks about in today's workforce, you know, social media kind of needs to permeate all of the learning that we're doing, kind of in the formal learning, the informal learning, and in the social space, and is a tool that we can use to help in the social learning and the formal learning and informal space. The challenge with that, in my mind, is that social learning and social media, as I said, are quite different. And social media is really designed to be addictive. And the way that Facebook and Instagram and these programs are designed, they're really designed to pull people in and to keep them there, and to keep them there as long as possible, to, you know, be able to then market goods to them through ads and things. And where that's dangerous, I think, in the workspace is when you look at social learning versus social media. If we have our workforce who are simply spending time on social media and not spending time on social learning, what we start to see is, you know, this addictive nature of social media kind of making work around the person pile up, and it's actually not a terribly good way of motivating learners in the space. And, you know, as learning and development professionals, what we really want, I think, with our social learning programs is for people to come in when they need learning just in time to get it, then to get back out and to apply it to their job and to start working again. So not this kind of addictive nature that we sometimes see in social media. And so all of this learning made us think, the research team that I was working with, about how we might go about reframing and rethinking 70-20-10, thinking about these things that we learned when we were talking with chief learning officers all around the world. And so we decided to get even more data, and took what we learned from our interviews and did a survey out to the members of ATD, which is the Association for Talent Development. And we got back survey responses from 42 different countries, over 500 responses, and asked them quite a few things about informal, formal, and social learning. And, you know, kind of again, trying to see how it lines up with the 70-20-10 model. As we asked folks what they were doing within their organizations to develop leadership competencies and develop individual competencies within the people that worked in their organizations, what we saw was that it actually wasn't 70-20-10 that was being delivered through the learning and development shop, but actually what people talked about was more, in our data anyways, came out to about 22% being learned informally and supported through the learning and development shop, 33% being supported through the learning and development shop in the social space, and about 45% being developed and supported and structured through the learning and development shop. And so we joke a little bit that, do we need to rename 70-20-10? And truly that's not kind of the punchline of this presentation, but it did get us thinking. And as we were looking at some of the quotes from some of the folks we talked about, you know, what we were hearing them say was that 70-20-10 was just a way to help people get their heads around concepts, and it really depends on the industry you're working with. And, you know, the thinking that my research team kind of came to from this was that 70-20-10 really focuses on us. So really focuses on us, the learning and development professionals. And, you know, other folks said things like, again, it really depends on sector, and it really depends on who your learners are. And so as we again started thinking about that learning, we thought, well, instead of a learning theory for learning and development that focuses on us as the learning and development professionals, shouldn't we be focusing on our learners? So trying to rethink kind of the theory around 70-20-10 about how we can make it more focused on our customers, our clients, our learners, and what they need to be successful. So with all of this in the back of my mind, the research team that we were working on with the Association for Talent Development, which was a team made up of myself, of Dr. Bill Rothwell from Rothwell and Associates in the Pennsylvania State University, and Lean Zabiero, who works as a partner for Rothwell and Associates. In partnership with the Association for Talent Development, we started thinking about ways that we could revision L&D more broadly. And we came up with this tool, which is called the Talent Development Framework. You can see the URL there. Any of you can jump online and use this. You don't have to be an Association for Talent Development member to use it. You can log on, and it's a way to start mapping your L&D shop or your L&D organization, so that you can start having conversations about what's important, what is critical, what is aligned with business strategy, and start visioning out how you might adjust your learning and development shop kind of with some of these new thinking in mind. So what I did when I started here at Berkeley was took a look at what the Berkeley Learning and Development Shop looked like in 2017. So I used the tool and kind of pulled out the primary components, so the things that we were working on as our really main focuses of the Learning and Development Shop, and then kind of took a second look and pulled out what I thought were kind of the secondary components, so the things that the shop was looking at but maybe wasn't focused on explicitly. And so using the tool online, I was able to create this puzzle map that you see in front of you and name the primary components by indicating that I wanted them to show up in that darker red color, and the secondary components I wanted to show up in the lighter orange color. And so I started figuring out what I had to work with when I came into working with the shop. And what it really was I had kind of 6 trainers who were really acting as individual contributors. We had 3 administrators and support staff, and then 3 student staff. And our shop was really focused on compliance training and tuition assistance, so providing tuition for staff here at Berkeley to take extension programs through our extension school. And in mapping out the full scope of what we were doing, it kind of looked like this. We had operations folks that were supporting a little bit of work in the informal space, a little bit more work in the custom program space, and quite a bit of work in the open enrollment program space, which again fell right in line kind of with what we showed in the learning from the ATD survey, where the majority of our time was being spent focused on formal learning programs with just a little bit in the informal and social learning space. And so thinking about this and thinking about the learning from the survey that said, you know, we should really focus on the learner, it made me think that I should start rethinking 70-20-10 and how that showed up in our learning and development space here at Berkeley. And so I did some research, and I found this model, which I thought was interesting. You know, it talks about the fact really that the formal, informal, and social learning are all really connected, and there's this movement around them for working and learning, and this cycle that people move through work and learn. And that was interesting to me, but it didn't quite get to where I wanted it to with this true focus on the learner. And so in doing some additional research and talking to some other folks and thinking about learning strategy, what I'm proposing is something that I'm calling the UMEWE model of learning. And so I actually was talking with someone at Dannon, the yogurt company in France, and they were talking to me about how they use this kind of a very similar UMEWE model in their digital learning space. And I thought that was really interesting, and that it could be applied more broadly to learning and development. So not just digital learning, but more broadly in learning and development. And the reason why I've come up to put this model in front of you all to be thinking about is it really puts the learner in the middle. So the me part of the UMEWE model is the learner, and it's empowering your learners within your organizations to be self-directed about finding learning opportunities for themselves. It still, of course, calls out what I call the you piece. So that is the learner looking to their organization, looking to all of you for the learning and development opportunities that the organization is sharing with the learner. And it also incorporates the we part of learning, which is the learner looking out to their social network, thinking about their network in more of a we kind of space, like what can we learn together collectively. But I think I'm proposing that we put this forward as a different way of thinking about 70-20-10 to really start focusing on the learner and thinking about it in just a little bit of a different way. And so with that perspective, I started working on my own team here in learning development. And again, using the talent development framework tool, after about a year worth of restructuring, which you can see on your screen here what we did, this is the new learning and development shop that has been developed at Berkeley. So we've really moved away from kind of a compliance and tuition assistance-based shop to what we've branded and are calling being the proactive people partner for people here on campus. And we did this by, we actually outsourced compliance training to one of my HR teammates here in Central HR in Berkeley. And we moved compliance out of the L&D shop and moved it into a space where I think it fits a little bit better. So the gentleman that's now running the compliance shop also runs the learning management system. And he's, kind of more focused on that systems kind of training. And it really made sense for it to move out of learning and development and into his shop. So when we outsourced compliance to one of my colleagues here at HR, it allowed me to hire in 2 new people with the full-time employees that were vacated by outsourcing that. And we hired an employee experience lead and an informal and social learning lead to really start thinking about kind of that informal and social learning space here at Berkeley. We also changed the job descriptions of 2 of our trainers. We had 2 subject matter experts that were in the shop that were really focused on creating job family specific training for the job family that they were subject matter experts in. And, I said, while that's effective as long as the world is static and nothing changes, I think it's much more beneficial to have folks who are just expert training and development or organization development folks working within the shop who can then partner with subject matter experts out in the industry or out on campus to develop training. So it's a little bit more agile and able to adjust as the needs of the organization change. So we made that switch. And then the only thing that was really budget impacted was that we had a career development lead here on campus, and we moved her from a 60% position to a 100% position. So to make the change from the picture that you saw earlier to this picture that you see now, the only budgetary change that I had asked for was about a 40% increase in one person's position. But then I had to spend a lot of time building partnerships with our operations team, where our compliance training went, with our organization development team, where we were able to bring in a lot of the performance consulting and needs assessment and process improvement, performance improvement kind of work that you now see in our representation of the shop here, and also our recruiting shop. So we made a strategic decision to take the recruiting shop for campus that was sitting outside of my organization and really bring them into Central HR and allow us to partner with them so we can start thinking about talent acquisition and succession planning as part of our overall L&D structure. So by making these couple changes and rebranding the organization to staff learning and development, which you see there on your screen, and asking the question of the folks here on campus, how do you want to grow today? We created a new structure for L&D here at Berkeley that's far more built out and more broadly engaging, and kind of, instead of working in these silos that we had before, really starts to think about how you can kind of integrate and work together to kind of engage all of the kinds of learning, informal, formal, and social, not in stovepipes or silos, but thinking about them, how you can engage with them all to really make a big benefit for your learners just in general. Again, focusing on the learner. So, and for folks that are purists and like to kind of drive this back to 70-20-10, it's pretty easy. As I was talking with you, I'm sure you were thinking of putting the labels onto these different buckets. The me self-directed learning is really the informal learning that we talk about, people going out and getting for themselves while on the job. The you learning, the learning from the organization, is really the formal learning, so the learning that we as L&D professionals are pushing down to the folks within our organizations. And then the social learning is really the learning that we're picking up from others. And that is all, so it all maps very, very easily to 70-20-10, just in a little bit of a different shift of mind as you're thinking about it. So as we're thinking about this, it becomes important to start considering how do we create this you, me, we kind of learning structure. And so in sharing a little bit of what I've learned over my journey of creating this here, I wanted to share with you a little bit of insight in what we did here at Berkeley to make this work. And creating the U piece, we really started to think of our learners as clients, and we branded ourselves. I mentioned that branding phrase that we used, how do you want to grow today? We actually changed the email for the learning and development team to grow@berkeley.edu. And we built our platform of learning out into kind of a 5-pillar structure, talking about and asking people how they want to grow their skills, how they want to grow their community, how they want to grow their career, how they want to grow their engagement, and then how they want to grow their resources, in order to really show that we're focusing on them and empowering them to kind of take ownership of their learning and development. I just need to. Then in creating the me, we talked about empowering learners towards self-discovery, getting them excited about creating their own learning journeys and going out and figuring out what just-in-time learning exists for them. But we can't just, especially in my space, we can't just allow folks to kind of wander aimlessly through the learning world to figure out their own learning journey. So what we've decided to do is, again, hire an informal and social learning person who coordinates and kind of curates learning pathways for people so that they can start to experience that learning and be empowered to take advantage of it, but not be expected to just go out and find it themselves. What we've learned with our audience here is that there is just an amazing amount of information available in the world, and our learners aren't at the savvy level right now to feel that they're comfortable kind of sorting through all of that. So, we're really trying to figure out how we can help them sort through without, prescribing it for them. So that's how we've been kind of thinking about creating the me. As you're thinking about this, you need to think about where your learners are and where you need to meet them so that they can be successful. Determine if they're kind of in a push space or a pull space for resources. So are folks looking for things and they're asking you to give them things, they're already out actively searching for them, they're pulling them from the learning and development shop? Or is there still some need for you to be pushing information to them because they're not quite there yet? So those kind of questions are all the questions that we went through thinking about how we were going to incorporate this into our space here at Berkeley. And then lastly, in thinking about the we, kind of thinking about creating this climate for social learning here on campus, we really needed to think about how we could educate not only the learners, but their managers about what social learning was. You remember when we started talking, I talked about the difference between social media and social learning. So it was really about sharing with people how social learning can be impactful, what it can do to improve performance on the job, to improve engagement, to improve community. All those kind of things were really, really important as we were educating about the social learning piece. We were lucky enough to have some communities of practice already in place here on campus, but they were really kind of acting alone. They weren't being supported by the learning and development team at all. So one of the very first things we did when we brought the informal and social learning person on was had her meet with all of our communities of practice and start engaging them as our ambassadors and thinking about how we could be partnering with them to be pushing out even more learning to people on campus. So those are just, again, some areas as you're thinking about the we space of creating the we in your organization. And then to round it out, I wanted to talk to you for just a couple minutes about the measuring of learning success. And so you remember I talked about in the very beginning that we started this project all because of a interview process and survey that we did in partnership with the Association for Talent Development. And so one of the things that we asked folks, in addition to what are you doing formally, informally, and socially, we asked them how they were measuring success. And what we saw was that, it's challenging to measure learning success and learning outcomes because it's hard to measure skill acquisition and it's hard to measure literal talent development. And, there's problems in how we're defining the phenomena of informal and social learning. And so how do we measure things that happen every day and everywhere? And how do we measure human social behavior if we as humans are, typically social creatures? How do we measure the impact that that social being and that social learning has on work? So these are all really tough questions to answer, but we came up with a couple kind of nuggets that I'd love to share with you now as we're kind of closing out the webinar. And what we learned about was really you can measure your learning through three different kind of lenses. The first was measuring learning through behaviors. So kind of looking for the changes you want to see in job performance, looking at post-program job-related assessments. And, the key to measuring learning through behaviors truly is if you don't know what behavior change you're looking for, you probably shouldn't be running a program. And kind of that was, our key learning through measurement is you need to spend time before launching programs to truly think about what behavior change you want and how that behavior change links to the overall organizational strategy in order to be able to see the progress that you've made in, successful learning and development. In addition to learning through behaviors, we've learned that, you can measure learning through business and business outcomes. And so looking at the business change that has been made after big learning and development initiatives have been put forth. And again, just like in learning through behavior, in learning through business, if your programs aren't being developed to address business change, maybe it's time to reassess your program portfolio and make sure that learning and development has a seat at the table when you're talking about overall corporate strategy and success and what it looks like and the talent and the workforce that you'll need to have in place in order to reach those goals. The last thing we talked about when we were talking with folks was measuring learning through employees. So, looking at the engagement of folks that you have, looking at how your succession pipeline is giving you the talent you need to be successful in the future, measuring employee participation, measuring engagement. You can also use online data mining tools for online discussion boards. Some of the folks that we were talking to were doing that to really get a sense of how the employees were engaging with the different forms of learning and if they were excited about it. And again, kind of our final key there is if employees aren't there and they aren't on board, it's probably time for you to find out why. So if you're seeing engagement numbers and you're seeing kind of morale and climate dropping, there might be some things that you can do in learning and development to help boost us back up. So just to end out, before we open up for questions, some of the key findings for formal learning is to really create learning journeys for employees, not just the one and done programs, and really start with your end goals in mind. Key findings around informal or the me learning is, in my case anyway, the informal learning really needed to be curated to be effective. And, when it's encouraged and facilitated, when you're talking to people about how important it is, when you're talking to managers about how important it is, it can be very impactful. But it's really hard to keep going, and it's really one of the first things that starts to drop off when people feel pressed or feel busy. So there's some attention paying that needs to happen in order to keep it moving in times like now when there's lots of change and lots of stress. And then some key findings around the social or the we learning is that you can use social learning in a lot of different ways. You can use it in onboarding, you can use it to deepen communication, you can use it to engage and retain employees, you can use it for people to share new job strategies and how to be successful. Ask your employees for feedback, ask them what they're looking for. Avoid being big brother about social learning. So that can be, there's a really distinct line about encouraging folks to partake of social learning and watching over it, making people feel like they're being kind of exploited or potentially surveyed in their use of social learning. But I think the key here is really not being afraid of social learning, but truly embracing it and thinking about it as an integral part of your UMEWE learning structure. And so that kind of brings us to the end of the formal part of the presentation. I'm happy to take any questions, or if there's anything that comes through on the live chat or opening up for questions, happy to talk with you a little bit more deeply about any of these things that I've just mentioned in the last 30 minutes. So does anybody have any questions or anything they'd like to share? So a question just came up in the chat asking about succession pipeline. So when I talk about our succession pipeline, I'm thinking about how we are making sure that we have the talent in place to reach the business objectives of where the organization, or where in my case the university, wants to go according to their strategic plan in the next short term, so 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. Here in our space, because we are a public institution, we have some very strict and very visible rules about how we're able to hire people, and some really tight bounds about promotion. So here in the US, working for a large public research institution, we have to have open and competitive bids and interview processes for all of the jobs that we hire for. At the same time, we want to make sure that we're still encouraging development amongst our staff here, and encouraging people to stay with the university and to grow their career here. So we need to think about succession in a little bit of a different way, in that we can't just think about succession as looking for high performers and then promoting them into places, into higher level positions. But we truly need to think about, what does the organization need to have in the pipeline, and who does the organization need to have in the pipeline in order to be successful in the future, and start developing those skills amongst the folks that we have here in-house right now. There's some research that talks about the fact that it's 6 times more expensive to hire and onboard a new person than it is to reskill or upskill someone that you already have in your organization. So in just thinking about those numbers and those statistics, and thinking about where we want to move in the future, that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about succession pipeline. Are there any additional questions that anybody has, or anybody want to share some of the kind of their experiences that we can talk about a little bit more deeply in this space? Well, if there's nothing else, there's a question that just came in that says, what data mining tools do you see on online discussion boards? So I haven't used the data mining tools on our online discussion boards. We actually have not even had a whole lot of success, to be honest with you, implementing online discussion boards in our learning and development space here on campus. We have some trust issues that we're really working through, and there, in our case, is some feeling that if you put out things on discussion boards and you link your name to them, that you might be retaliated against, or your managers might see you as not being successful in your job. And so we right now are still working on building up that trust and building up that visibility and building the safe space for people to ask questions and to have discussions in a very public space. So we haven't quite got there yet in learning and development here, But I can say that I also teach a class on organization development for Penn State's World Campus. We have an online master's program at the Pennsylvania State University that focuses on organization development. And I do have discussion boards in that space. And the LMS, the learning management system we use, is called Canvas. And Canvas incorporates kind of data mining tools, so you can look at how people are discussing and some keywords that are coming up. I'm sure there are much, much, much more savvy tools out there to kind of pull the words that are coming out of your discussion boards. I know there's groups that use tools that are similar to word cloud tools, where they will take all of the words that have come up in the discussion boards and kind of indicate which ones are coming up more frequently in a word cloud or in a kind of more structured way, so you can start to see the things that are coming up in a visual way. We have not incorporated any of that yet because, as I said, we're still trying to build the story around why these kind of learning in the social space is important. So any last questions? Well, if no one has any more questions, I want to say thank you so much for your time. Thanks for spending the last 40 or so minutes with me. My email address was at the very beginning of the presentation. It's astopper@berkeley.edu. I hope that you'll reach out with any questions you have, or at any point, so we can keep the discussion going. I'm open to continuing to build the network and build the new thinking around how we in the learning development space can really become impactful and make a true difference. I think that right now, with the amount of change going on in the world and employees looking for being upskilled and reskilled in order to remain relevant, the work that we're doing is so vitally, critically important. So thank you for all of the hard work that you're doing to make sure that the folks that work for you and with you are remaining relevant and engaged and excited about working and continuing to move the world forward. And I hope that you'll find me on LinkedIn. I hope that you'll email me and we can keep the discussion going. So thanks so much for your time, and I look forward to connecting with you sometime in the future. Have a great day.